Well, I'm not proud. I'm going to leave my hat on. It's so cold down here in the barn at the moment that I've got a sweater. That'll happen. It's only going to get colder. I got to fix the windows and get some heat maybe. But anyway, oh, here I got to grab this because there are a couple things I wanted to tell you. I'm trying to convince you that language is amazing. I'm so sorry about the sound. The sound is a real problem. I was looking at that video, one of the videos today, and I was thinking, maybe next year I'll write subtitles. I could probably find a way to do that because it almost needs subtitles. It's so important to be able to see a person's lips and mouth as they speak. And that would be so nice for people who speak a foreign language. Somebody like Ed, this guy from England whom I've never met, who I want to say has the misfortune to speak like someone who's British, but that's a joke. But he has some trouble with my American accent. Well, subtitles would help. I thought about it actually. And another thing, backing up, when I had Anima Iustorum in Mano Dei was on there, I usually like to point out that a Roman could go up to a Roman and in effect at that time say, souls just of, in, hand, God of, are they. And that would make sense. Well, it doesn't make sense in English, of course, but that way, that order of the thought works in Latin, which it's a way to... Oh, that's my glasses. All right, anyway, new point of evidence here. Languages are always changing. We tend to think of the language that we speak as being the same. The language I learned to speak when I was 4 or 5 years old is the same as now. No, it's not. It's not the same. Languages are always changing. But the thing is, they're changing so slowly that typically we don't realize it. They seem like, languages seem like constants. Well, they're not constants. And linguists use the term drifting for that, at least when I learned this. They call that drifting. Languages are always drifting. And that's a great term for it. I.e. means that is. It's a great term for it because if something's drifting, no one's steering it. Currents are taking it. And you can't necessarily guide it. Well, languages drift. People can't, in spite of how hard English teachers try, and grammarians will try to be prescriptive and say, here's the way you should speak. In spite of that, languages drift. And I liken it to a raft that is drifting off the coast of, say, Florida. If that raft breaks into 2 pieces, it'll drift apart. Well, I'm getting into what I want to tell you on Monday, so I better leave that. But I want you to have that term, drifting. Languages are steadily drifting. Now, you can most see this in slang. Slang, I think, could be defined as the part of language that is changing the fastest. It's drifting so fast. And now, slang mostly applies to vocabulary, but it's changing so fast the dictionaries can't keep up with it. And some people want to say, well, if it's not in the dictionary, it's not a word. Well, that's an absurd statement, but nonetheless, you'll hear people say that. So slang, most people are aware of slang. And I'll get my students to imagine their grandmother and say, now what would grandma, who is maybe 40, 50 years older than you, or 60, what would she not say that you would say? And I'll ask them, and the kids will come up with, well, she wouldn't say hackin' frickin' fat. And the kids will giggle if I even say that, because that's not the way I speak. My slang is the slang of, say, the 1950s, or maybe to some extent the 1960s. And it sounds so strange to hear that come out of my words, but I want them to imagine their grandmother. And I go grandma instead of grandpa, grandfather, for a reason that I guess I won't have time to tell you. Since I got this far into it, I will tell you that apparently women, in some extent, are more the conservators of language, more so than men, maybe. shouldn't have gone into that probably because I'm not ready to pursue it. Now, I like to take this word, this not a word, this is an idea, and run it through some history. I would even try to give years for this, but I'm not going to write them in because for one thing you can't be that accurate. But the word that you come up with in slang, if you really like something, I mean, you could say, that's nice. Well, nice probably was slang at one point. It probably was. Yeah, I'm sure it was, actually. The etymology, the history of the word nice is a very interesting one. But anyway, about in the 1920s, cool. People started to say, that's cool. Not meaning that it wasn't warm, like I'm right now, I'm not warm, I'm cool. No, it means you like it, that's cool. That was the 1920s. And then, around then, people would say, that's hip. You're hip if you're good. You get into the 1930s and especially 40s, you'd hear the word swinging. If something was good, it was swinging. That was the age of swing. That was the 1940s. Swell. Grandma, now great-grandma might say, hey, that's swell. I don't know if you'd still have one that would say that's swinging. That's swell. That's neat. Now, I would say neat, and sometimes I'll hear my students say neat because I listen. I not only listen to what people say, I also listen to the language that they use, and I'll pick up on that. Of course, the word cool never went away. That became part of the language. It didn't come and go. So many of these came and went. Neat, yes. Peachy. Well, I have kids say, yeah, I heard Grandma say, that's just peachy. I think I've heard my students say that. And sometimes they'll say peachy keen. Well, I remember keen in the 1950s. Nifty, I might say that, being the product kind of in my slang of the 1950s. Groovy, people laugh at that because it came and went. That was in the 1960s. Was it Simon and Garfunkel had that song "Feelin' Groovy"? For a while, everything was groovy. This would be late 1960s. Far out. I can just hear John Denver, I think, saying "far out" or with the bloodshot eyes. Anyway, awesome. By the time you get to the 1970s, I noticed that this was not my slang anymore, but kids, when I was teaching, kids were saying, that's awesome. I knew the word awesome, but I wouldn't use it in the same way. Gnarly, we're getting clear into the 1980s now. The Valley Girls, I think California was very influential. Tubular, I guess that has to do with the surfing, I think, maybe riding a tube or something. But there was a period of time where California speech was very influential. Bad meant good in the 1980s. Sweet. My daughter says that. And her speech would be out of the 1980s and 1990s. If she really likes something, she says, that is sweet. Whack. Now, when I do this, I'm coming up through time, and eventually I ask the kids, okay, so what have you heard somebody say? And they get all excited. They want to say it, and then they'll giggle, and they'll laugh if I say it. You mean like that's a whack car? If I really like that car, that's a cool car. That's a whack car. And they'll giggle, but they'll say, yeah. Sick, meaning that's great. You really like it. That is sick. And on it goes. Every year that I taught this, I would be so amused to hear where it would go. It was hard to keep the kids stuck on adjectives because they wanted to say about what they had heard, and I would usually ask them, well, even if you wouldn't say it, have you heard somebody say something that you've noticed? And they usually would. So that's evidence that language is drifting. That's the place where you can see it. But if you want to see it in a more academic way, just consider that in Shakespeare's day, or the King James Bible, people would say things like, hast thou thy dagger there? Do you have your dagger there? Is what we would say. The language has drifted away. Now that's 400 years. The Story of English, a documentary, that's the one with Robert McNeil. I mentioned it before. The episode Black on White deals with this because the blacks in America have had a profound effect on American English and world English as a result. And especially toward the end of the section black on white, which I'm pretty sure you can find that online. If you're interested in this, there you would, because it deals with the hep talk so well of the 1940s, and then later, for a different reason, I'm going to be showing you just a little bit of that documentary, that part right there. Okay, I have one more brief video today. Thanks for tuning in.